In this video, I'm going to talk about how to plant a tree. First, I'm going to talk about the solution I'm soaking my tree in before I plant it. So this is the KNF part of this video. And there's a difference between what I'm doing and traditional KNF practices. So if I was doing true KNF, what I would do is I would let this rootstock totally dry out before I soaked it. And I didn't do that. This tree has been sitting in wood chips overnight, so I think it dried up somewhat, but probably not as much as the KNF community would tell you to do. So make your own decision on how much you're willing to let rootstock dry out before you soak it. And then in terms of your solution, I'm not going to give the recipe for the legitimate seed soaking solution. Just look at Chris Trump's videos and you will find it there. But the traditional recipe involves FPJ, OHN, and brown rice vinegar. Two of those I don't have. I actually have the one that's hardest to make, which is the OHN. So I do have some OHN in here. But this time of year, it's not easy to make FPJ because it's wintertime. There's no young plants emerging that you can make FPJ out of. So if you're actually going to create a seed soaking solution for seeds, which is going to be later in the season, then yes, you can make FPJ and use that in that solution. But in tree planting season, which is earlier, I could make an FPJ out of those thistles. When you hear what I put in here, you're going to think that it's plenty, unless you're a very traditionalist. So what you're seeing mostly in here is rainwater. And then I put a bit of C90 in here, but that's only because I have leftover from years ago. If you're not going to buy something, you could put sea salt in here or just seawater. And the ratio is supposed to be about 1:30, but I don't really measure things anymore. I just kind of eyeball it. I also put in OHN. I have some homemade plant vinegars that I've made KNF style. I'm not sure if they were all finished. I tasted one of them and it was a little bit sweet, but the other ones had a sort of vinegar smell to it. So I'm going to list all of them in the description. But there was enough plant vinegar in there that I thought it would make up for not having any FPJ, because plant vinegars are made from the remainder of your FPJ. Again, if I'm saying these acronyms and you're not getting it, but you are interested, then check out Chris Trump's YouTube channel because he goes over each recipe. And speaking of Chris Trump, he also has his own website where he has his own recipe for this solution. And it's different than what he has on his YouTube channel. But he also puts in FAA, fish amino acid. I'm going to do a video about that later on my experience with that. But since I don't have any, I put in a little bit of fish waste, JLF, instead. So that's in here. I also put in a little bit of my Horsetail JLF, a little bit of remaining rock dust that I have, and a little bit of oyster shell that you would feed to chickens. All of those to sort of replace the stuff that I didn't have that was in Chris Trump's recipe. So I think if you're going to deviate like so much as I did, just keep in mind the rationale behind each of the ingredients. So what I think it's going for is you want some microorganisms in here. You want some plant power in here, as much of, plant nutrients, available nutrients. I think some of that vinegar is trying to make the nutrients from the plant inputs to make them more available to the tree that you're planting. So there's some minerals in there too. So minerals, plant power, microorganisms, kind of medicine also in the plants, and salts, which is also minerals, but at a very, small proportion it's mostly rainwater, of course. Another thing I like about it is because after you plant a tree, you need to dump a lot of water on it. So I needed to bring up water here anyway at this planting site. And so it was easy for me to just throw some nutrients in it. So that's the soaking part of it. And another thing is, if you were doing it right, you would want to soak it between, 8 and 24 hours. So after you've dehydrated it, then you soak it, and then it's ready for planting. I started soaking it earlier in the day. Maybe it's been in here 5 hours or something like that. So again, I'm not following the rules, but I am gonna water the hole with this solution when I'm done with it. So it seems logical that you would want to amend your hole with organic matter, because maybe you have poor soil and you want to increase aeration. Maybe you want to increase the nutrients in there, or you want to increase the water holding capacity. If you do amend this hole, then initially the results will be positive as long as you irrigate. But what happens when the roots reach the interface between the planting hole and the native soil, the roots will see that there are fewer available nutrients in the native soil, which is more finely textured and is less aerated. And so what will happen is the same thing that happens in a container, which is the roots will hit the edge of the hole and then turn back inwards where all the nutrients are, where it's more hospitable. And we know why that's a problem. Also, water movement is affected when the soil varies from one space to another. So the amended soil is going to be more porous, and so water is going to wick away to the finer textured native soil. And so in the summer, the tree will deplete the moisture within the hole, and it won't be replaced by the native soil. So it's going to stress the tree out unless you're irrigating it. And then during the wet seasons, the water is going to move quickly through the amended soil, only to be held back by the more slowly draining native soil. So the water will flood the roots and eventually kill it. And then finally, all of the organic matter eventually decomposes. So what's going to happen is the tree is going to sink over time, and that will create even more flooding around the tree. So roots will establish better in native soil. And if the site isn't suitable for trees, like fruit trees, then you're not supposed to plant there. But it would have to be pretty bad. You want to backfill your hole only with your native soil without any amendments. And you want to mulch with wood chips or another water holding material. What I have seen in videos that I do agree with is a mound soil in the middle so that you can position the roots down while the tree stays elevated. Now, one thing I always do wrong, and I am happy to admit it, is I never make my holes wide enough. You are supposed to make the holes wider than what I have right here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do some maneuvering where I make that root more lateral. So I'm going to try to stick it straight into the native soil that way. And you'll see when I'm done with it how much I have it raised above. So the idea is not to bury the graft. You want about that much, you want a couple inches below the graft to be above your soil. It's probably okay if the wood chips come up higher, but I've done that before, but this time I'm going to try to just make it higher so that even with wood chips, the graft is still substantially, visible. And so this is how it looks planted. I have this much rootstock above the soil. Because I lifted the tree a bit, I ran out of soil, and you can see it's kind of mounded up. I'm going to fill the rest of this with wood chips. I'm expecting it to sink over time. Another thing that I've done is I've stomped around it because you don't want any air pockets in there, and you want to minimize the sinkage that happens later. Also, you want to water it in. So I half watered it with my solution. Also get some of the air bubbles out, and I'm going to add the rest of the water after I put the wood chips down. So this is how it looks with some fresh wood chips. Because I already had aged wood chips here, naturally when I dug the hole, the smart thing would have been to separate it from the wood chips on the surface by putting it in a container like that. But it was mixed in with the wood chips. So when I backfilled it, against my own advice, organic matter got in there. It wasn't deep down, it was just kind of on the upper roots. It's not because it's poor design, it's because it's poor execution. That is my new tree. I don't already have enough.